I'm Michael Richardson, CTO of Dynamic Consultants Group, and your host for this exciting podcast series. Today is an exciting episode where I'm joined by most of the guests that have appeared on the series. First of all, I just have to say thank you to everybody that's on here because every one of you has given time to make this podcast series a success and really share with the community. What do we do with VMware cost increases and all of these things? But just to give a shout out for a second, I mean, we've got Carl, we've got Ben, we've got Bronson, Yarmir, Ernie, Daniel. I mean, all of you had great points to share. And so now I'm excited to see what chaos ensues when we put everybody on one call and start asking some difficult questions. We're going to try to jump around to a few topics, and we'll see if we can't keep a little bit of order. But if we get unruly, then we get unruly. So the first question I want to throw out there is something that we started to talk about in Bronson's episode. We've touched on this in a few, but I just want to ask the question: at what scale does Azure Stack HCI not really make sense anymore? And when do we need to go from, okay, let's talk about Azure Stack HCI to let's talk about Hyper-V and the more traditional kind of Windows data center deployment? So Bronson, I will let you fire the first salvo, and then you could be prepared to defend yourself.
Microsoft markets Azure Stack HCI as an edge solution. That does not mean in the data center. It means at the edge. If you have a data center that is one rack, Azure Stack HCI will work for you. Up to 16 nodes, right? If you want to have two of them, now, if you're not using virtualized networking, you can make them talk over VLANs, I guess. But if you were using NSX before, you're not going to have feature parity with Azure Stack HCI across multiple racks, right? That's Windows Server.
Boom, the gauntlet has been thrown down. Can you effectively scale and manage Azure Stack HCI beyond one cluster in a single data center? That's the question.
So I think it's important to just say that we're referring to scaling with SDN. That was what Bronson's main pain point is there. So let's call that out for what it is. Yes, currently SDN with Azure Stack HCI doesn't scale well from a management story. So I'll stop there, but that is a true statement.
Or an interconnectivity story.
Right.
I mean, it's not just the management.
Yarmir, what do you got?
I heard 16 nodes, right? So yeah, on the paper it's 16 nodes, but it doesn't scale up linearly. So you cannot just add, let's say 3 more nodes and have if you have 3 nodes and add 3 more nodes, you probably will not have double the performance, right? So the same applies if you have 6 nodes, and if you want to have 12 nodes cluster, it will not double your performance, right? So there is a sweet spot, I guess, it's like 5-6 nodes maybe, where you want to end and then build another cluster, right? Because it will make sense to have another cluster of the 5 or 6 nodes, and you will have a double the performance, right? So yeah, I would probably argue with 16 nodes.
Daniel.
Yeah, look, I'm just going to throw it out there because why not? I think if you're building 16 node clusters in a production environment, you've got rocks in your head. Just the resiliency. You can only lose 2 nodes out of a 16 node cluster, and your data's gone. Yeah, sure, you have backups and that kind of stuff, and it depends on your workload.
Did they move scope volumes to Azure Stack HCI, or is that Windows Server only?
Scope volumes is there.
Scope volume is there since ever, but I think you don't want to deal with that because you have to identify where the scoped volume is. And if you have poor documentation, and if you didn't create the scoped volumes with a PowerShell and you don't know where the scoped volume really is, it's hard to figure out where the scoped volume really is because you have to collect the slabs and identify where it is, right?
And I guess
so you only know when you are creating it, right?
That is
you don't have any. Yeah.
One of the key things I really drove home in my presentation was if you're going to revamp your data center, 100% automation, rebuild automation. So you will know where those scope volumes are. in every rack
Absolutely.
programmatically. Yeah.
If you know what you're doing,
if
right?
you're doing it,
it's
right.
absolutely okay. And then this is where the conversation will probably start with the Jeffrey Snowers. It should be kettle, not your pet, right? Your server should be a kettle. So if it just doesn't work, just heat up the grill and just do a barbecue, right? And just should not be you should not name your servers like a pet.
It's true. There are disadvantages to 16 nodes. The only real advantage is that at 16 nodes with an all-flash storage, you get access to a erasure encoding that is extremely space efficient at 16 nodes. Extremely space efficient.
That's a good topic, erasure coding, right?
On resiliency though, you can technically go more than three-way mirror. The code doesn't stop you. You get into that unsupported territory of it's not tested. But if you want, you can tweak your volume so you can have an 8-way mirror on an 8-node cluster, and every node has
copies of data 8, copies of data 12.
Yeah, if you want to, I wouldn't do it, but if that's really what you get about. I just want to go back a second and say scope volumes for people who are listening who possibly haven't looked into it, and maybe Michael can throw a link in somewhere for people who want to find out what the hell we're talking about. High-level scope volumes are the ability to pick which nodes the data or volume will live on. So if you've got an 8-node cluster, you might say the first 3 have volume 1, the next 3 have volume 2, and the last 2 share volume 3. It's just a high level.
Sounds like you need SCVM, man.
Does SCVMM even support scope volumes now?
It's not aware of them.
Application, you can do service templates, and you can define that.
That was another point.
Define supported, right?
Yeah.
There's supported and supported, right? Like supported, it will work, but no one in Microsoft wants to work with you on this feature, or it's not supported because it doesn't work. So
yeah, but at this point, getting a Mini Cooper to do the bus route to take 80 kids to school, it's is it the right product for that?
So it's even worse than if you're going to go at 8-node volumes or 8-node clusters max. Now you really have no network scalability, right? So you have to go Windows Server and put a bunch of racks under a single SDN.
If you're looking for that SDN scalability,
if you have a VMware data center, you're probably running NSX in it.
Oh, right? I'll challenge that. I have managed some and been involved in some large VMware deployments that don't know how to spell NSX.
How are they managing tenant networking?
VLANs.
That's insane.
Wow, that's the reality. I know multiple service providers who run everything as VLAN.
And you get 4,000
or even nested VLANs. So I've
seen this. Or they use like Cisco ACI VLAN translation to get around limitations and stuff.
What happens when you fill up a cluster and then your customer wants another VM on a rack on this side of the data center?
You extend it to the top of rack switches for that rack and down to the host.
And you have max 4096 virtual or 4092 virtual networks?
Yeah, you got VLAN translations. You got to do a bit of management and stuff. But
for instance, I've seen customers using nested VLANs somehow.
Oh,
I have no idea how this works, but this somehow works. So on the switch layer, you have different VLANs than you have inside the VMs.
So the question is, how much is a network engineer versus how much is a Windows Server engineer?
I'm just saying. I mean, this expanded to 4,096 theoretically to the double amount, right? So the quarter. So it's a.
And is that easy to automate VLAN and VLANs?
I have no idea.
Can you drive everything from a tenant portal like that?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
Well, I would like to tell something about the size, if I may. So I have written an article about it, a blog article on tech community about cluster size and why you should not create 60-node clusters. That could be an interesting read for the audience. And the other one is, Ben just said it. So by standard, we have 3-way mirrors. So when you're expanding the cluster, you're automatically raising the the chance of having a huge failure, you know? I mean, you have amount of disks, you have amount of nodes, and if you have just three-way mirror, and you have maximum two disks you may lose, and you are basically statistically increasing your failure rate. You know what I mean? So this has to be considered, and this is the good thing I like about Azure Stack HCI in particular, that the amount of clusters is not that relevant. So you can basically do intent-based clusters, where in the past people using Hyper-V mostly trying to put everything into one cluster to have less management overhead.
Yep. So let me ask.
He's so tiny.
Not about talking SCVMM and so on. But
welcome, Philip.
We have to say hello. But we have to say not everyone has SCVMM, and data center means different things for different kind of customers. So, you know.
Yeah. So let me ask about something from a migration perspective that got brought up is okay. So let's say that you do have multiple Azure Stack HCI clusters. You're staying in that recommended kind of size of six-ish nodes for your cluster size. What do you do when you need to migrate between clusters with Azure Stack HCI? I think that's a story that would be interesting to talk about.
Oh, Yarmir, we literally just talked about this 2.5 hours ago. Like, so
yeah,
let's.
You want to break your NDA?
No, but I'm going to say this. Currently, so it is what, June 24th, 2024. As of today, there are two versions of Azure Stack HCI you can run. You can run 22H2 and you can run 23H2, right? I have been telling people, and internally at my company, I have been telling myself and the rest of my team, just keep using 22H2 for now. And the reasoning behind that is, yeah, thank you, Dan. The reasoning is pretty simple. There are a lot of things that are currently supported in 22H2 that aren't yet unlocked and supported with 23H2. And that's not just in the OS and solution itself, but also if you're a system center user, like if you use VMM, you can currently use VMM with 22H2. It is currently not unlocked in 23H2. So with that, you could do I have 10 different 22H2 clusters and I just move VMs between them, storage and hosting, like where the VM actually lives wise, as if it's Windows Server, and it's perfectly fine. You also don't have to worry about the nuance of the Azure Arc Resource Bridge projection in the portal, right? Like that concept of it being hydrated on a new node. I sound like I'm talking about some sci-fi here, but I people that know that term get what I'm saying. Like it's that's a big pain in the butt for people right now with 23H2. So we've just been telling people just pump the brakes. Just use 22H2 for now. It works. It's a great VM hosting solution. You're not going to get a lot of the automation through the portal with it because a lot of it has been deprecated or just discontinued altogether. But if you're just looking to host VMs, it's perfectly viable.
Well, let's talk a little bit about 23H2, right? So it's a different thing. It's a different world. 23H2 is, let's say, Azure Stack Hub to Windows Server, like these two worlds, right? So 23H2 is built on the concept of deploying consistently Azure Stack Hub every time, in the factory, right? So you basically refactored all of the scripts to make a consistent deployment. Now with the cloud deploy, you basically initiate the cloud deployment, right? So you basically push the configuration to the cluster. So it's completely different world, right? From 22H2. And in this world, some features are not available or some features are mandated, like network ATC. And the SCVMM doesn't work with the network ATC because in SCVMM you have a logical switch, right? And the logical switch is, it's something you define in SCVMM, and it's like a traditional virtual switch. While with the network ATC, it will generate the name. It will use a different way of isolation of the virtual machines. It uses not net adapter VLANs. It uses net adapter isolation. So It's just different, right? So you have to ask yourself the question, do you want these 23H2 features? Do you need these 23H2 features, like consistency in the security, maybe creating virtual machines from the Azure portal with ARM templates? Do you want a Azure Virtual Desktop, because that one is only supported on 23H2? So all of these things, right? If you don't need it, and if you just need to have a infrastructure rock solid machine with SCVMM, and you need some Azure Stack HCI improvements in the code, like I think the one that is in Windows Server 2025 to improve the performance on NVMEs, I think it's already in Azure Stack HCI, isn't it? So yeah, this is it, right?
Yeah, Daniel.
It's a big topic.
Yes. Yeah, I think that actually is a really, really good point to make there, Jeremy, is the fact that it's not for everybody. And if you're, to Ernie's point, absolutely, I gave a thumbs up when he said, basically stick to 23H2 at the moment. Absolutely, I've got customers running 22H2. And yeah, there's no immediate plan to move to 23H2, because of the process and whatnot. But there's also, if I'm talking to a customer that's jumping on the bandwagon now and they need to deploy more cloud services and be more of that sort of that hybrid world, then absolutely 23H2 is for you. It depends on where you are in your I guess your modernization life cycle, your cloud roadmap. Insert marketing jargon here, but it really does depend on your use case. I mean, a big one, AVD is a huge draw card for Azure Stack HCI, but you can't do that on anything but 23H2 and forward. So, I mean, that's it just completely nullifies that conversation. But again, it's your miles. Was it your mileage might vary, but it really depends on your use case. And actually that little summary there, I guess, goes back to the data center, the Hyper-V versus Azure Stack HCI as well. Again, it depends on the customer. I mean, I've worked with a very large, varying type of customer. Some customers who are running as low as under 50 VMs, 40 VMs on a 2 or 3 node cluster, right up to customers looking to refresh from their data center, at scale, multiple racks, and it depends on your use case. I mean, if you're a legacy, legacy is such a bad word, but if you're just doing thousands and thousands of VMs and you've got VLANs or software-defined networking, then is big bunch of Azure Stack HCI clusters right for you? Probably not. But if you're a app development house and you're doing deploy and destroy of your infrastructure, you're treating it like cattle, not pets. Again, to quote Jeremy, to quote Snova. If you're a bit more modern and deploying large scale containerized deployments, then maybe an Azure Stack HCI solution is right for you. I don't think it's fair for anyone. I don't think it helps anyone to say this one's better than the other, or this one's what you should do.
And don't forget about the SBE and the lifecycle management, right? So all of this solution builder extension. Yeah, it's absolutely awesome. You can have like one-click updates to the cluster from the cloud.
Absolutely.
So you can select your 10 clusters, right?
You made a great
and
point,
just fire
Jeremy,
off
around it.
Yeah,
about a big Azure Stack Hub, right? It's got the EC, the Enterprise Cloud Engine. I mean, that thing was dear to my heart for many years, managing Azure Stack Hubs. So, and just as somebody who was running a platform with Azure Stack Hub, it's kind of like, how do you run it? I spend my days on the golf course and down at the beach and at the theater, and that's how I manage my Azure Stack Hub, because it just takes care of itself. Whereas the VMware engineers are sitting there spinning plates and doing whatever they're doing, adding VLANs to the virtual switches, and dear God, why vCenter doesn't automatically hydrate that for you, I don't know. But it's a completely different use case. But yeah, that cloud engine is amazing, and that whole lifecycle management thing of Azure Stack Hub, Azure Stack HCI, Azure Stack Hub is its scorecard.
Let me put a couple of highlights on a couple of things that have been said. So something that was said is going back to the scalability, which one, networking answer. So the answer I got and that I heard was, if you want to use Azure Stack HCI and you want to do VM migrations inside of your data center and things, stick to 22H2, use SCVMM, and you can do some of those migrations, and that works and that's supported. You don't get quite
or Windows
some of
Server.
or you can do it on
Server,
Hyper-V.
right?
Same thing. You can do Hyper-V, right? And with 22H2, you're not yet getting some of those really nice cloud-enabled features. You are getting some cloud management. You're getting representation in the cloud, but there's still some limitations with where 23H2 brought a lot more. And then Carl, I know you had your hand up for like 5 or 10 minutes, so go ahead if you have something you wanted to add on that. Okay, you're good. You're good. All right.
No, I would like to add some, but please.
Yeah. So with that said, I want to talk about some of those newer features. One, because I think it's exciting, and two, because I think there's probably a sobering reality on some of them that I want to make sure is called out too, right? So there's things that are already here, like Azure Virtual Desktop on Azure Stack HCI, and I'm really curious what you guys would say about the state of some of the things like Azure SQL on Azure Stack HCI. I know some of you have a lot of experience with AKS on Azure Stack HCI, and just talk about the maturity and ease of management on some of those. I think would be really interesting to hear the pros on the HCI side.
So first of all, on that one of the things that I come up against a lot is people go, oh, I want Azure SQL on my Azure Stack HCI, and you go, okay, cool. Are you ready to run AKS? And they're like, what do you mean? I just want the SQL part. And it's like, oh no, it doesn't run
exactly.
Yeah, it's the first thing people miss. It's like, no, I can run Azure SQL now on HCI. It's like, yeah, with AKS.
Yes.
So it's really interesting how that middle layer is kind of missed in a lot of the messaging, and people just think I can deploy my SQL databases now. So it's just one fallout.
Yeah, two kinds of, right? So there are two kinds of SQL. There's SQL managed instance and SQL enabled or Arc enabled SQL, I think. Arc enabled SQL and the SQL managed instance. SQL managed instance is running in an AKS, while AKS enabled SQL Server is more or less you are able to create SQL instances from the Azure, I think. I didn't try that one.
Yeah, but Ben is right about it. So I recently had this question from a customer, and I think Ben was the one to help me. Thank you for that again. And I'm a licensing guy, and I'm having a lot of question marks here. So how can I actually license this with AKS and SQL and so on? What about future? What about patching, ASU, and so on? So it's a lot of things to acknowledge here. It's not just, okay, we have a new fancy platform as a service and let's go. So a lot of things to consider, even things like I would like to say backup. What's about the backup? Is it compatible? I don't know, right? You have to test it, and that's the point. And licensing is really important. I mean, this is the point with Microsoft. We all know this. You can do a lot of things, but this doesn't mean you're allowed to, and that's licensing. Point.
The licensing is really cool, right? Because I recently had a conversation with a customer, and I was like starting to ask some questions like, how do you license your Microsoft world in your data center or in your current cluster, in your ASXi, right? And I was starting about licenses, and I was like, hey, by the way, do you have an enterprise agreement? Because you're in a big company, they might already have enterprise agreement. I was like, yeah, maybe we do have it. And I was like, we have some good message for you, right? Like Azure Stack HCI is for free for you. And then all of the services in Azure Stack HCI are for free for you, and not all, right? But at least the Arc-enabled service, right, are for free, right? So, Windows Server Azure Edition is for free on Azure Stack HCI. So all of these things, and the customer didn't know, right? So yeah, it's included in the Azure benefit.
Yeah, on the Azure Edition as well. Yeah, the Azure Edition of Windows on HCI. That's the one that comes with free
patching.
Yeah, that's a big deal.
So if you run like lots of web servers or apps that are doing, say, as internet facing, you want to keep that security vulnerability to a minimum. Maybe single instances can't do outages to reboot regularly. These 3 months of security hot fixes without having to do a reboot, can be a real game changer for people.
Yeah,
and
again, I could even imagine that they will be working. So it's not like I know something. It's just my imagination. that they will be working on something like hot patching for SQL. I mean, this would be a bummer. So you can basically think about twice, do I have to balance it? Do I have to make an HA construct? For some, not for everyone, right? Bronson is raising eyebrows, but it's like you have to think twice if you want to have the extra layer to have a real HA application awareness.
Yeah. Bronson, you have had your hand up forever. What are you going to know?
2 points. One, your choice is also going to be dictated by your organization's legal licensing and accounting practices, right? So if you're a service provider, if you're reselling technological services, you're doing Windows Server, right? You're not doing any of the Azure Stack HCI because that's single tenant stuff. If your accounting practices are, we buy a bunch of stuff and we depreciate it over time and we're happy to write a couple $1 million check and just let it happily depreciate, then you're probably doing Windows Server and new hardware and stuff. It's hard enough
maybe because you can still buy the licenses and buy software assurance and then get Azure Stack HCI free included with that. So
right. And then you have to look at what the customer's doing in their IT practices to start with. If they're a big VMware shop, then they're probably not running a bunch of AKS and Managed SQL and AVD. They're running, Horizon DAS if they're doing an AVD solution, or Citrix. And they probably want to keep on doing that because that's a big migration to have on top of migrating all your fabric, right?
I see a lot of people talking about maybe this is the time to jump onto the AVD bandwagon actually, but you're right, that increases the complexity.
Yes, it's a lot of work.
You're doing Horizon,
it's another piece.
If you're doing Horizon, you're on an even more weird ground at the moment because not only is it not Broadcom, it's now another third party that's bought all the end user compute stuff, right?
Oh, who bought Horizon DAS?
Didn't they spin out all the VMware end user compute to someone else? Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
The company they spun out, but yeah, it's not a Broadcom product anymore. So.
And then I can just add the point, licensing once again. So it can make a lot of sense to think about twice. I mean, even Citrix had quite significant licensing increases. And if you have one M365 A3 or something like that, right? You could even run EVD. I mean, you have access licenses included. So for Exchange, for AVD, RDS, you don't need them. So it's included. So you have to do the math. What I said in the first episode, basically, I'm repeating myself, sorry, but there is a lot of things to calculate and see, okay, where is the spot? And of course, what Ben and others also said, you have also to make the math about transition costs. But how often do you transition all the things? So you might not do this all the time. It's not like, this is also something that I keep telling them. It's not like today you're doing Azure Stack or Hyper-V and tomorrow you're going back to VMware because prices are different again. You're not doing this. So it's a lot of transition that you have to do and retraining and so on. No, RES is not included into E3, pardon me. It's just you can use AVD. You have access licenses to AVD, right?
They do give you an access license for FS Logics as well.
And FS Logics, yes, as well. Yeah.
And multi-session. Come on, you have multi-session.
Multi-session, Windows 11.
I will point out that Windows Server RDS is amazing, and every version it just gets more amazing. And you can do anything with it. You don't need Citrix unless you're on an oil rig. If you've got really low bandwidth and really high detail requirements, then use Citrix on an oil rig. But everywhere else, I do everything with Windows Server RDS and some GPUs.
I would like to disagree. I'm not a Citrix guy, but I know people in my team working with Citrix, and I'm helping them to get the things in shape. And I've seen the merits of Citrix, certainly, Citrix VAD. And of course, if we can have AVD and some third-party integration, I think we can get there. But
on that,
for
like
PBS and
Nerdio
stuff,
is a big
it's really
AVD in
great.
cloud.
Hmm?
So Nerdio is a big company that does orchestration, automation, and optimization for AVD in cloud.
Nerdio, we
And
have Hydra.
they were an
which
early
is-
adopter of supporting the AVD on
Mhm.
HCI as well. So I know a lot of the features that they release for AVD and cloud work on HCI as well, around that optimization of all your AVD workables. So,
Yeah. And as far as I know, Citrix Virtual Apps and Desktop is not even supported on Azure Stack HCI, is it? I don't think so.
As
Or
far
at
as
least
will
in-
Citrix support it? Like
I'm not even sure if it's supported on Azure Stack HCI. So
it's definitely
it could-
supported on Windows 11 multi-session.
So if it's supported on Windows 11 multi-session, then it doesn't matter, right? Which hypervisor you run. If it's a Hyper-V in Azure or Hyper-V in Azure Stack HCI.
So maybe I'm talking bullshit, but what I heard from the Citrix team was like, okay, if you wanted to use Citrix with PVS services for provisioning, you need
Sure.
SCVMM, something like that.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And for
Something like
MCS.
that, right?
Yeah.
So it's another complexity adding
that's
to
a
everything.
weird thing.
Yeah.
Citrix never made a straight up provider for MCS just for Hyper-V. Like they forced you to go through VMM, and I think that was some
SCVMM,
sort
yeah.
of political decision to do that for some reason. But they should have. There's a market for a third party, definitely, and make a Citrix MCS provider for Hyper-V.
Yeah. Hey, Daniel, you have had your hand up, and I've tried to get to you like a couple times. What do you got?
No, yeah, I just actually wanted to go back to Bronson's point around the service providers. Yeah. So you can't do multi-tenancy with Azure HCI. That's nothing new. People have been screaming about that for a while. But it depends on your cost modeling and your service modeling, right? Like, so we're a service provider essentially, and we're doing Azure Stack HCI for our customers. But instead of doing a big shared multi-tenant platform, which we still do with Hyper-V, we're actually going out to dedicated Azure Stack HCI clusters or racks for our customers. And again, it depends on your customers' appetite.
Managed co-location, though.
Yeah, but potato, tomato.
Are you charging them per VM?
No. Well, you put a. It depends. That's just a commercial. That's a commercial discussion. That's not a technology discussion. And as far as cost containment and running a multi-tenant platform, it's a completely different. You kind of like this big mixing bag of making sure that our income is bigger than our outgoings. And that's essentially how it works. You're trying to cost model it up, and every customer has a different requirement, technology or roadmap or whatever it might be, and you've got to constantly trying to juggle this big behemoth to service all of your customers' needs. Once we talk about bringing some customers onto our dedicated sort of managed colo, as you call it, which I don't disagree. And all this stuff's just names and branding, but it's so much simpler to manage, and we can go to customer instead of charging you per vCPU or whatever. What we'll do is you've been running these VMs for however long. What we'll do is we'll give you an Azure Stack HCI. You've actually got 150% capacity to what you're paying for now. You got the same cost model, same cost essentially, but it's a cost contained and it's yours, it's dedicated. And you know what? We can modernize or do whatever. And again, your mileage might vary, depends on the customer portfolio you have. If you're a hoster like Microsoft, where you could potentially just have one VM or thousands of VMs, well then, yeah, sure, having Azure Stack HCI dedicated clusters doesn't work for you. But if you're a managed service provider, you're working with your customers going, hey, you've got between 50 to 100 VMs, and you're sort of categorizing up and great, cool, and you have your shared platform next to it, then I think Azure Stack HCI is a perfectly viable solution for service providers to deliver them.
So how do you allocate a private IP address to a customer's Azure Stack HCI? How do they attach that to their workload? Sure.
Well, see, again, you're assuming that everything's on the shared infrastructure.
So they have their own
have
IP.
to have
they have their own internet circuits when you set them up with the cluster?
Sometimes, yeah. Yes, yeah,
Okay.
mostly. That's what we're trying to get to. Yeah, I'm trying to break it all away. So again, rather than having shared everything, the only thing that really is shared is the walls, the power, and the management processes. And we're really trying to isolate it up. And again, depends on the customer size, depends on their appetite. But it actually allows us to provide more, I guess, fixed cost solutions for our customers and it's going to give them more bang for buck, really.
Do you have an ISP co-locating in the data center with you?
No. Probably, actually, yeah. Like our data center has everyone has
like when you
all the
buy.
ISPs,
Okay,
AWS, Azure, a lot.
All right, that's feasible then, yeah. Otherwise, you're maintaining a large shared networking infrastructure for all the north-south traffic from the internet for your customers, right? And there's a lot of shared cost in that.
Yeah, but I mean, we just get an IP transit, plumb it into whatever port there is, connect up to a VLAN. There you go. You know, that's now your network, and we make sure that we don't have overlapping VLANs in the same infrastructure, and you don't treat it all as one big conglomerate. You can slice and dice it up to suit your customers.
I don't know how you guys do it. I stopped using VLANs in 2016. Just never again. I have
I love SDN.
four VLANs per rack.
I don't do it,
that's it.
Yeah, I don't do SDN to the scale that you're doing this in one big SDN. We've got multiple small SDNs. I think I was chatting with you and Ernie a little while ago, and I told you about the size of my SDN database. One of the SDN databases I was working with, and you guys said it was cute. You know, and that deeply offended me. But yeah, it depends on your portfolio, right? And what your thing is. I don't like that blanket statement. I don't like any blanket statements really, unless it's me having a jibe at someone. But I don't like the blanket statement of Azure Stack HCI is not for service providers. I think it is a service provider solution if you've got the services that suit that.
So
it's just not multi-tenant.
I think I know where I want to head. The next two big topics. So the first topic I want to do is I want to talk about smaller scale deployments, because we started out talking about this, like, okay, what if you're at like data center, like racks and rows of servers and things, where is it a good idea to go this way? Where's a good idea to go that way? Let's talk about the smaller story and things 8 nodes or less, right? Or you've got a lot of sites and few nodes. Let's start talking about where does Hyper-V shine, or where does Azure Stack HCI shine? Maybe even in comparison to vSAN or VMware, vSphere, vSAN, all these solutions, because I think that could be a really, really interesting, exciting discussion. And then after that, so we'll try to spend 5-10 minutes there. I want to give at least a couple minutes to talk about hardware and okay, you've got a 3-year-old VMware infrastructure. Can you use it? And I've gotten a few perspectives on this already, but I'll be excited to talk about that for just a couple minutes if we can squeeze it in. So smaller use case, smaller story, 8 nodes or less, maybe multi-site. Where do the Microsoft solutions shine in comparison to VMware? Jaromir, you've got both hands up. It says, or maybe you're the second. Oh no, that's what that means. That means you're the second one to raise your hand. I was like, I didn't even know you could put both of them up. So Ernie, yours was up first. Go ahead.
I'll just throw this out there because it's a softball. Like if your workloads are running Windows Server, it's a no-brainer to go with Hyper-V just from a licensing perspective, especially if you're going to go data center. So obviously, I think like the turnover point for like 2-socket is like if you have 7 VMs running on a host and like go with data center licensing, something along those lines. I'm not the licensing guy. I think there's like everyone else on this call knows it better than me. But like unless you're running Paramount Linux workloads, and an argument can be made there against it too, just from like a mishmash perspective, but it's kind of a no-brainer. And then it was touched on earlier about the benefits to Azure Hybrid, like the if you have software assurance on top of your data center licensing, how you're able to get Azure Stack HCI for free, right? Like it's not free, you're paying for something, but it's included. So it's the argument's the same there, right? Whether it's HCI or Windows Server, like just you don't need to pay for your Windows Server licensing anymore like a maniac. Like you probably were paying out the wazoo.
Yeah, you're already getting all of this, data center HCI goodness. If you're already licensing the Windows VMs, you don't have to buy VMware because you're already getting a lot of this.
Vice versa, right? Like if you're licensing Windows Server Data Center in some capacity for the hardware or whatever you're hosting these VMs on, hopefully that's what you're hosting them on. The VM workloads are effectively free at that point with data center licensing.
Yeah, but which if you're running VMware and you're at any level of density, you already are buying data center licensing is the point. So like, do I then tack on, it's the whole VMware tax conversation. So we've talked about that. Jaromir, what did you want to add?
So yeah, if you think about smallest footprint you want to have with Hyper-V, you can start with Windows Server Standard on a single node, right? So you can have like a small box with just a bunch of disks and just run a Hyper-V there. But then we should probably talk about a support, right? How you will raise the case with the Microsoft. Who will you call if you will have an issue, right? With the small deployments, like, few servers in the Hyper-V, you will not likely hit any issue, right? But if you will grow and you have hundreds of locations and then something, you will hit some nasty bug and your partner will not be aware of what to do and he will not have a good level of the support with the Microsoft, then you need to have some way to raise an issue with the Microsoft. So I think this is where the Azure Stack HCI shines, right? Because you can just create a ticket in the Azure portal. So this is another topic I think we should open, like why you should go with Azure Stack HCI, what is the minimum footprint where it kind of makes sense to go from the Windows Server Standard, where it can be single box, to maybe Azure Stack HCI single node, right? Because of the support, it's included.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
Ben.
Yeah, the support is one of those ones that's often forgotten, and that ability to raise that case through the support portal and the dedicated support teams behind it and all of that is so often overlooked at that small scale when you're working with your own internal IT teams and stuff. And at that small scale, I guess, was where I wanted to kind of chime in as well. I've done a lot of really successful 2-node Azure Stack HCI and Windows Server with S2D deployments. Two nodes work really well. They have the ability to use Cloud Witness, which is basically a free blob you run up in Azure. It costs like 1 cent a month or not even that. And so you can do full redundant 2-node with local resiliency. So you can lose a Disco node and a whole other node, still have everything up and running. I've seen 2-node clusters come back from both boxes going down, with failures and stuff. It's super, super solid, super stable way to get that small scale. I've seen them deployed in ice cream factories where they need to run some OT workloads. I've seen them deployed in data centers for small scale customers who only have 20 odd VMs. I've seen them used for some real dense workloads because they just only want to buy 2 boxes and they pack them as many cores and as much RAM as they could get into 2 boxes. So those 2 nodes work really well. It's really easy to understand your failure domains. It's really easy to understand your capacity. You just fill up a whole box. Once that's done, job done. There are caveats. You can still go to 3 nodes. And then there's some stuff you got to do around your volumes to get them out to 3-node resiliency and changing that. But 2 nodes also has the nice thing that you can do it without switches, the backbone between those 2 nodes for your storage networks. So, if you're only running, Ubiquity switches for your, user networks or whatever, you can buy 2 nodes, have them with RDMA between them, direct connected, and then still have just standard uplinks to your top of rack switches or your end user compute. 2 nodes have a lot of simplicity and a lot of value there.
And I think Philip should talk about all of this, right? Philip, you are silent and you have so much experience with the 2 nodes and small customers.
Howdy. Apologies for my tardiness. Things are a little crazy. I've got a few deadlines that are coming over top, and it looks like we're going to have a couple of things happen here that we've been working on for a couple of weeks to a couple of months, actually, in some cases, and it's just lots on the go. 2 nodes. Our largest cluster is 4, if you want to count our Hyper-V cluster and then our Sophos cluster on the other side, just aggregate, we're getting to 5, 6 nodes. Value-wise, if we're talking about tier 1, or we're talking about custom stuff like what we do or whatever the case may be, On the hardware side, it's going to be a pretty straightforward story. If we're talking about vSAN to Azure Stack HCI, or in the case of hosting companies, because that's probably one of the bigger pain points that we're looking at addressing here over the next little while in these conversations as well, is the folks who have hosting companies and are deeply impacted by this. And for them, and for folks who are running two to three nodes, looking at their vSAN cluster is going to be a fairly straightforward, okay, I have all of this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all of my components on this side. This is what I need. Generally, we suggest Mellanox. And cost-wise, we might be involved. There might be some input as far as cost goes to align things with Azure Stack HCI or Storage Spaces Direct, whatever the side of this discussion we're talking about, either customer or hosting company. And value-wise, like you guys talk about the licensing side of it, it's really simple, straightforward. It's included. On the Azure Stack HCI, most folks will have some form of is it a hybrid, where you have some hybrid cloud benefits, and it includes your Azure Stack HCI. I know there's a technicality in there for folks who are in the cloud where they can get Azure Stack for free, and you might have talked about that before I got into the call, so I do apologize for missing that. But on the hardware side, I'll back the truck up, keep it simple. You got your vSAN, you got your Azure Stack HCI or the HCI S2D. All of the components will be relatively the same. The one catch we'll need to look at is the storage connection or connectivity. And so long as we either have that in place already as far as the networking components, or we don't, when we apply the addition of those components, we're good to go. Then we got to talk about getting those VMs from one side to the other. If we're talking about a limitation there of 2 nodes or 3 nodes on premises and they're relatively new. Does that address kind of what sort of what y'all are talking about?
Yeah, I mean, Philip, we know you're doing a lot of this in a lot of customer environments, 2 node, 4 node type of clusters, and really seeing this work for a lot of your clients and building out really resilient solutions that you guys stand behind. And so, that's, I think, for listeners, just to say, this is in the real world at small scale as well as large scale is working. But, a couple other things I'll ask too, just, I do want to ask a hardware question. We're about out of time, but, where is Hyper-V and Azure Stack HCI really shining over and against VMware? I think, there's a couple things we haven't mentioned, and one of those is just performance in general. And we can get, really, really divisive on that, but there are at least some areas where I can say definitively Azure Stack HCI outperforms VMware, right? And one of the biggest ones is storage performance, right? I think I'm seeing a lot of head nods. Everybody's saying storage spaces, it outperforms vSAN hands down, especially when you start getting into NVMe storage and some of the, I mean, go ahead, say that, Daniel, say it.
It outperforms anything. It does. I think I was watching Bernie's episode the other week, and I started getting enraged when people sort of getting on. There's all this misinformation on the internet around performance and the resiliency of the S2D, and anyone listening to this, if you've heard anything around negative things around S2D, it's not the software. It was implementation, and it's not a personal attack on anyone that did it. It's just, and look, to throw them a bone as well, the documentation wasn't great early on, but I mean, the amount of deployments I went in there, and 9 times out of 10, it was just, they were unsupported NICs. They were doing unsupported drives. They were doing really wonky stuff with the architecture. They were just doing, having iSCSI with S2D going as well. They were, having really odd solutions, and they're going, it should just work, right? What do you mean? It's the S2D sucks or whatever. It's like, no, you're not paying attention to the rules, and because Microsoft weren't as militant in their rules and regulations around how to support S2D and the deployment of it, then it sort of got a bit of bad name, and that's not a shot at anyone personally. It's just they got it wrong.
That was, I mean, early days.
I've got something to contribute to what you said there, Daniel. A little bit of history. Let's talk a little bit, go backstory here. So in 2016, we obviously got Storage Spaces Direct. 2019, we have S2D. We now have Azure Stack HCI. Today, we have Azure Stack HCI and S2D as well, Storage Spaces Direct to the abbreviation. SSD didn't really work, Storage Spaces Direct because storage, right? But we go back in history. If we look at, and we ourselves, and I myself, and there's one other vendor out there, we started on Storage Spaces back in 2012 RTM. So I've been on this gig for, coming up on 9 years now, almost 10 years. And what ended up happening in the 2016 era was it went out there and it made a big splash and, oh, look at what we're doing and look at the performance and all this kind of stuff. And then the first question out of somebody's mouth without actually asking the question until after the fact was, I'm going to run all that on parity. Oh, dual parity, thinking RAID, right? Software RAID, yes. RAID, NFS, NFS, whatever you talk about when you get into RAID. It's not RAID, it's software-driven storage, SDS. So we ended up getting a lot of backlash because a lot of folks started off with, I need all the storage I can get, and I'm going to use Storage Spaces, and blah, blah. Okay. No, that was one of the big blowbacks that happened. The other one was in 2016, we didn't really have a good idea of the software storage side to cache ratio. Capacity to cache ratio. And what we ended up with is a lot of folks going out there going, oh yeah. And their cache size is 2%. And their performance, their capacity size is huge. And they end up with 10 or 15 or 20 or 30, 40 workloads, whatever the case may be. And they're sitting there scratching their head because the performance absolutely sucks. Well, guess what? We ended up learning another hard lesson. Cache to capacity. And I remember Klaus talking about that fairly often after the fact when we started going, why are we having all these problems? And ding, capacity, ding, cache. Oh, okay. So on the storage side, one of our goals, we do a service provider licensing agreement, SPLA, for our HCI appliances for our small clients, because they look at the $6,000, $8,000 Canadian license fee for data center, and they're just like, that's CapEx. Can we put that over there? Yeah, sure, no problem. So we give them a small SPLA fee for their data center license. And what we end up with is, in our case, a small 2-node cluster can cost under 25 grand, and they can get 150,000 IOPS at 70/30. So we're talking Exchange, we're talking SQL. These are small to medium accounting firms. Their smallest is 15 seats. Actually, they're 11 seats now. But they're conscious, right? They're $5,000-$6,000 an hour during tax season, and S2D is their insurance policy, which is what high availability is. Period. It's an insurance policy, and the better the resilience, the better the insurance policy, but the higher the cost. I had kids. My first kid came along. My very powerful V8 SHL was kind of like, whoa, wait a minute, I need a life insurance policy. Oh, I got to stop driving like, I stole it. And it's the same thing with the technology and the hardware. So 150,000 IOPS, whatever the case may be. Go ahead.
I got to wrap you up for 1 second because I know Ben's got to leave, and I want to at least say, Ben, thank you so much for coming. I do want to ask one more hardware question if some of you guys are still able to stick around. I know this has run a little bit long, but I think it's a good question. So Ben, thank you so much for coming. If you need to sneak out, don't feel bad. If anybody else needs to sneak out, no worries. I want to ask this last question about, okay, I have a VMware environment. Let's say I've got, I don't know. We'll just say I've got 6 or 8 nodes of VMware, and I'm maybe I'm running vSAN, but I'm only in year 3. My renewals come up for my licensing. I'm thinking maybe I want to move to a Microsoft solution. What do I do with my hardware?
Are you getting new hardware? Or
that's the question that we have to answer, right? Do I have to then go out and buy new hardware?
If you don't have new hardware, what are you going to migrate? what are you going to migrate to? Where's your buffer to hold the workloads?
That's a great question.
I have been saying for years that I want to start a like 6 to 12 month hardware leasing company here on the East Coast. Bronson, I'll sell this idea to you, where for VMware migrations, just like you roll in with some hardware, a big fat JBOD and scale out file server, and that's where things are landing. And then you can, it doesn't need to be Azure Stack HCI. It's just like you do your migration from VMware to Windows Server, and then you leverage Azure Migrate to get it from Windows Server to HCI and project into whatever, if you want it to show up in 23H2 or whatever, that solves that problem right there. But like the whole shtick is you're leasing the hardware from me for a very short term. Like it's like a lifeboat rental thing. I'm sure someone does it, but I've never had to deal with them, so I'm taking credit for it.
I'll offer a tidbit of experience / policy, standard order, procedure, whatever you call it, for us. If we're going into a situation like that, that's kind of what we do in the case of a migration. So we've got a questionnaire that we ask, and this is relevant to the topic at hand. We have a questionnaire that we ask folks. Do you have a backup? Oh, yeah, we're backing up. Okay, have you tested it? Yeah, we've tested it. How have you tested it? Files and folders, or have you actually done a bare metal, bare hypervisor type of restoration? No. Oh, no. Okay, so we will send a complete set, a backup appliance into that. We won't even allow the contract to be signed until they commit to us providing a backup solution. And we won't even touch their stuff until we have a reliable backup and we've actually restored it ourselves on our hardware. That's something that needs to be considered, because I know some folks who have IT companies who have been burned, and we're talking lawsuit territory here. So, and we're not talking, 6 figures, 7 figures, we're talking big dollars. So first order of business is make sure the freaking backup is in place. And then the second order of business is using the hardware we're using, ODM style, if you will, what was supposed to be commodity cluster hardware back in the day. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more, right? That's true commodity hardware. Now, I'm nudging Dell a little bit here. That's tier 1. But using our commodity hardware, we can provide a set of inexpensive nodes fully connected and ready to go, along with our backup appliance. And that's the business model that I believe can augment what you said there, Ernie. We provide the hardware, we provide the backup solution, and then the beauty of it all is, if you're familiar with doing work on cars or anything that requires a core charge, right? They pay for it up front, okay, because they're going to keep it. 9 times out of 10, our experience, when we supply our appliance, they're keeping it. It's like, this is great stuff. We know it's going to work when the poop hits the rotary oscillator, and away we go. So, yeah, I think that'd be a great business. In fact, you've got my gears going here.
Oh,
so
you heard it here, LLC.
What I took away from that is, if you're going to do VMware to Hyper-V migration, you probably at least need some hardware on standby. And if you're at a little bit larger scale, that may be, okay, well, maybe I've got 10 clusters. Maybe I need to buy 1 new cluster, so I've got extra capacity. If you don't already have that, if you're at that scale, right? If you've got some extra capacity and you can kind of do rolling migrations to Hyper-V or Azure Stack HCI, take this cluster, take this vCenter or this sphere.
You got to be cute and make sure you're not, selling something to someone that isn't supported either. Because just because you can run VMware on something, they may be running ancient hardware, may not be able to support certain security features. The CPUs may not be able to, there was a recent issue. A few people were complaining about bug checks in Windows Server 2022 and HCI 23H2. Carl, for some reason, I think your name might have even been attached to it. I don't remember exactly, but you can't just tell people, you can install this on ancient Dell R515s. Come on, right? There's some nuance there.
Yeah, no, that's a good point, and that's something that you guys have already hit on this a little bit. The very early days of S2D was commodity hardware, there's this huge compatibility list, and there's all kinds of stuff that's supported, and there's a lot of stuff that didn't really work. Even if you did it by the book, it was like, yeah, this doesn't actually work. I ran into some of that myself, and so the same is still true here. Like if you've got VMware clusters and the hardware isn't really on the not just supported list, but like this is a good idea list. You need to take a pause, and you might need to get new hardware, and you might justify the cost with it with your savings from VMware anyway, or your increased density, right, from newer hardware. Which I wonder, Carl, was that your point you're getting ready to make, the increased density? No, that's okay. Anyway, so all that to say, like, it's a maybe, right, on reusing your hardware is kind of all the opinions I've heard. Philip, Ernie, is that where you're at? Like, depends. Let's take a look at it.
18 months. Yeah. I'm going to say, based on our solution set, a 60-month life amortization. I can't say that word very well. Amortization. So we amortize based on 60 months. We take that cost and we break it down and per user, and this is what it's going to cost you, and this is your insurance payment every month, if you will, relative to your user count. We amortize over 60 months. So if we have a relatively new solution, and I'm going to say under 18 months, then we're going to look at, okay, what are we going to do to migrate? So some of the workloads are going to be really bullet simple, like domain controllers. They're easy. Just install on the new cluster and away you go, kind of thing. Or you can move them over onto some sort of hardware to keep your Active Directory active while we're in the process of redoing the cluster, the vSAN cluster, into Azure Stack HCI or S2D. Now, I'll add a caveat in there, and that is, do not put anything server related on a consumer desktop-based hardware type situation. I have worked on recovery situations where that was the case, and we actually had a flip bit situation. One was a total loss of a database, and the other one was, I think we lost about 35 or 40% of the database due to a flip bit on the memory side. And then on the other side, it's bit rot on the hard drives. So this is going back a little bit. The spindles are still being used, spinning rust is still being used. So a very important disaster recovery consideration is to make sure, no matter how this is migrated, how the current solution set is migrated, no consumer, no non-server grade systems are being used. This is more important in the small to medium business area.
That's what the ECC RAM is for in servers, right? To protect against the cosmic ray flipping an electron.
The quantum fields.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. So, Philip, to get to the point, 18 months. If it's older than 18 months, you're probably looking at new hardware. Is kind of your perspective.
Yeah. The existing hardware can be repurposed post. So there's some openings that happen there as far as disaster recovery. Some dev has been crying for its own dev lab, that kind of thing. So there's some business use case for the existing cluster of hardware. Resale value will be pretty good.
If you have a fiber channel storage infrastructure with a VMware cluster in front of it, those old VMware cluster nodes will make great scale-out file servers to go in front of that fiber channel SAN. You don't even have to reconnect anything.
There you go.
Add in some RDMA NICs.
Yeah, RDMA NICs, exactly. Yeah. Talking about the NICs, yeah, you want to probably explore just one brand. That's what we usually use. Yeah. There's only one, I guess, that you should look into.